Well, hey everybody, Mike Griffith here. I hope everybody's had a great week. It's Friday night Mike. Back to go a little freeform for you tonight. No guests tonight. Of course, earlier we had Michael Barnett was on my show earlier this week. I believe, was it Tuesday? Man, time's just going by so fast. I think it was Tuesday. And then earlier today on Dog Nation Daily, you saw Jeff Sentell and Brandon Adams interview Jake Fromm and Andrew Thomas. So the hits keep coming. But tonight it's me flying solo with you. I hope, again, you've had a good week. This is my Ingles on the Beat show. I do a show Tuesday around noon, and then I do a Friday night and a Sunday night, and we talk football. And that's what we do here in Georgia. That's what I do, and I enjoy doing it. It makes me feel good. I think we can all use a little bit of feel good. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to jump right into the news because I thought this was feel good. My first feel good of the day was seeing Brandon Adams and Sentell do that interview with Jake Fromm and Andrew Thomas. You're going to want to check that out. They did a really nice job. That's as relaxed as I've seen Fromm in a while. It's good to see Jake loosen up a little bit. It's kind of like, where's that been your whole career, Jake? Look, Jake's a pro. He's going to do fine in the NFL. His talents will take him where he can go, and he's got to get with the right system. That's my assessment of Jake Fromm. Where he goes means everything. Andrew Thomas is a consummate pro. He's another guy, long-time NFL player, provided he stays healthy. Cross your fingers, knock on wood. So much of football is luck. It's a dangerous game. We know that. It's kind of my opening thoughts on those guys. So that got the day started off on a really good note for Dog Nation. And then this afternoon, we had like a Dog Nation social hour where our manager, BJ Sweeney, myself, Michael Carvel, you heard Michael's name a lot in production, Connor Riley, you know well, Jeff Sentell and BA. You know, we just kind of visited for an hour and a half, and we just talked. We talked about life. We talked about football. We floated ideas. I hope all of you get an opportunity to do that with your coworkers because that's really healthy right now. I mean, we're all quarantined. We can't see one another like we usually do. And we have a daily conference call, but it's just not the same as being able to kick back and just talk with one another. So I was very thankful for that. And then tonight, so here's the news. You saw it in the headline. Greg Sankey was doing an interview on a Knoxville radio station, WNML. It's hosted by a friend of mine named Jimmy Himes, and Jimmy's been a longtime journalist up there in Tennessee, does a tremendous job, probably the best radio journalist that I've ever been associated with. And he was a newspaper reporter before that. You know, long story short, Jimmy was the Tennessee beat writer in Knoxville before I was back in the 1990s. So he kind of preceded me. Anyway, great reporter, great interview with Greg Sankey. And Jimmy posed a couple of difficult questions, one of which was, could there be a scenario where we could see a football season with some conferences but not others? And we all wondered this earlier this week when the College Football Playoff Management Committee had that teleconference with Vice President Mike Pence. The Big 12 Commissioner, Bob Bowlesby, came out and said, well, it's something to the effect of, we got to have students back on campus before we can play football. And all the college football fans went, oh boy, because it's up to each individual state when they open back up, right? So what if, especially with the Los Angeles mayor saying they may not have sporting events until January, what if the state of California, what if everybody else is on board? And I don't think this is going to happen. I don't want to pick on California. But let's just say everybody else is on board, but California says, nope, we're not doing it. Our classes aren't going to be back in session. We're going to take more stringent quarantine methods. Then what happens? Can college football go on without some schools or without some leagues? And I thought Greg Sankey, again, always the smartest guy in the room. But here was his response to that and some buzzwords to that. And I've got a story up if you want to read it. It's easier for me to decipher reading it, but appreciate y'all listening. Here's what Sankey said. If there's one small niche that's inactive, but perhaps the entire Southeastern Conference and others are able to function, that's one of those hypotheticals we don't have to answer right now. But you would think there would be a bit of room in that decision-making. So in other words, Sankey's saying, look, I don't have to answer this question right now. There's still time. Sankey continues to stress this. SEC media days are still 85 days away. The college football season, 135, 140 days. There's a lot of time to gather information. We don't know where we will be at that juncture. But we're all playing the what-if game, and we're all considering our contingency plans. I mean, this is responsible planning. So here's some more background from Sankey that leads you to believe that college football could indeed go on if the state of California was shut down, or if the Pac-12 dropped out, or who's to say, what's going to happen with Rutgers or some of the other schools in the areas that are more stricken and more affected at this time. And again, things can change. So this is all provisional, all contingency, but it helps me sleep at night hearing Greg Sankey say this. He said, if you look back when we were trying to decide how to approach the basketball tournaments, each of those decisions was an independent decision by a conference. He points out that the Ivy League made a decision on Tuesday. They canceled their tournament, and the SEC canceled on Thursday. So there's a precedent here, right? If you're a lawyer, you're going, aha, here's a precedent. The NCAA left it up to the conferences when they wanted to cancel their basketball tournaments, and that's what Sankey says. There's probably a lesson or an example that, in fact, we are independent entities. There's a lot of conversation among the autonomy conferences. There's that word again, not Power 5 conferences, autonomy conferences. Sankey is sending a message. Autonomy conferences, autonomy. We have the freedom to decide what we want. There's a lot of conversation among the autonomy conferences, us, the ACC, the Big 12, Big 10, and Pac-12, and the preference would be to go down the road together. Okay, so yes, they want everybody to play. They don't want to have to go on and play football without the Pac-12 or without any California schools or New York schools or whatever the potential is if some state should choose to stay shut down. And he also points out that the NCAA has an oversight committee and they have others active in the thinking about this. So it's on the table. It's out there. Nothing has been decided. But the fact that Greg Sankey tells us and leaves the door open that yes, he would imagine that if there was one small niche, i.e. the state of California, for those Pac-12 teams, and everybody else was on board, that there'd be room for discussion. And then he points out that there's a precedent for conferences to have the autonomy to decide what they want to do. So, to me, that's really big news, because that was a big concern that came out earlier this week about if there's not college, because then you thought to yourself, okay, how do we get the entire United States on the same page here? Because it's up to the individual states to decide when they open up again, right? Texas ready to rock and roll. California saying, man, till January. So it's going to depend, and there are differences. There are differences in the states. And I don't want to spend all our time talking about this, but I just felt like this was big news. And so I wrote a story on it, and I sent out a notification. And I'll take a look at some of your comments on this before we move forward, because, again, we're not going to make the whole show about this, but I do think, especially the Dog Nation fans and Georgia fans, listen, Georgia is so in tune because Georgia has a championship team. All right. I mean, this could be the year, folks. I mean, they are absolutely loaded. And so, you want to hold your breath if you're Georgia. Oh my gosh, not this season. Because if you don't play it, let's be honest, a lot of these guys, they're not going to stick around. They're going to go to the NFL. You think Richard LeCounte's going to stay another year? He's not going to stay another year. Jamie Newman's a graduate transfer. He's not going to stay another year. This is it for them. They're moving on, man. So here we go. Brian Friedman, Dogs were just starting to play well in basketball, tournament canceled. That's what I tell everybody. Hey, look, they were playing as good as anybody at the end of the year. They beat Ole Miss by 18, and they were. Give Rayshawn Hammonds credit. Although Rayshawn I think needs to come back for another. I don't know what he's thinking about, maybe going pro, especially since he can't meet with these teams. That's a tangent. Let's reel this back in. Tim Harrell says, all we need is Clemson, Ohio State, Oklahoma, and the SEC champ to get the playoffs going. That's probably who it would be. And Tim, to your point, I've got some thoughts on that. How would you do it, right? And Greg Sankey, that's part of the provisional planning, is how would the season look? How would they move forward? In my mind, bare minimum, you've got to play your conference schedules and then take your 5 automatic qualifiers. Okay, so let's pencil the Pac-12 back in. California's going to be ready to rock. And you take your 5 conference champions, and then you take 3 wild cards. And to me, that's your playoffs. You expand the playoffs from 4 to 8. Why do you do this? Because you're not playing a complete season. Because you get rid of the non-conference games in the month of September. And again, this is my worst case scenario. If they're not ready to go by Labor Day, how do you get the season in 2 months? Well, you play 8 games, and then you take the conference champions as automatic qualifiers, and then 3 wild cards or 3 at-larges, and you play an 8-game playoff. Now, the question is, what happens to the group of 5 schools? Well, my answer for them is we take a second look at how we do spring sports. Remember, one of these shows I did last week, I was talking about an old Vince Dooley idea, right? Split squad scrimmages against other teams in the spring. You televise it, and you play the game. Now, some fans have gone, oh, that'll never work because, it won't matter who plays. Well, it doesn't matter. We recognize it's a scrimmage. We do recognize it's a scrimmage. I would watch a scrimmage, a split squad scrimmage between Georgia and Ohio State. I would absolutely watch a split squad. Now, not everybody would. Some people, oh, Mike, that's watered down. It's April. It's April. And I would pay to go to a game. And I think fans would go to a game. Imagine Georgia and Ohio State split squad scrimmages. All right. On Saturday, there's a game in Sanford Stadium. And on Sunday, there's a game in Columbus, Ohio. Scrimmages. Televised, fans in the stands. Right? Why do you do this? Revenue. One, to change it up, because there's no reason not to have inter-squad. They do it in baseball. They do it in basketball. Why not have a spring scrimmage against another school? So now I'm saying, okay, let's walk that idea back, and let's make it a group of 5 school. Let's make it a buy game, because they need that money. They need that buy game money. So maybe Georgia plays Louisiana Monroe. They take half their squad and plays Louisiana Monroe on Saturday, and plays, I don't know, what's another group of 5 school on Ohio on Sunday, right? But you find a way to get the group of 5 involved. Anyway, the bottom line is this. We want to get back to normal. We want to get back to a normal football season as soon as possible. So what can we do between now and normal to minimize the financial losses and maximize the experiences for the student athletes? That's the moving target. And I say it's a moving target because the facts that we're dealing with change on a daily basis. And this has happened all the way back. I sent a story, a link to the New York Times story in November, that there's this thing called the coronavirus, and they're not sure if it spreads from human to human. Right now they think it spreads from animal to human. This was in November. This is the New York Times. And it illustrated just how news can change. And certainly on this whole deal, news has changed. And we've got a long way left before September. So again, I'm just throwing some ideas out there, some thoughts out there for you. Before we move on and talk about, let's talk about tomorrow's game. Mike, what game am I talking about? Do you guys know what game I'm talking about tomorrow? What game am I talking about tomorrow? Can you tell me? That was a deliberate pause to drink my tea. Tonight it's peppermint, decaffeinated. Been a long day. Had some green tea earlier, but it's a little later than normal, and I don't want to get too wound up, or I will be up until 2 o'clock in the morning, and that is not a good look for me. The big game, the what are they calling it? The Georgia the virtual G-Day game. The virtual G-Day game. Now listen, I love 95% of the ideas that come out of Georgia marketing. It is incredible. It's great. But this is not a virtual. This is a replay of the Notre Dame game. It's not a virtual. If you wanted to do a virtual, and these guys could have done it, okay? So I'm going to be clear about this. I have covered, the last 2 schools I've covered, Tennessee and Georgia, their film crews are unbelievable. All you got to do is look at their Twitter accounts, look at the hype videos they put out. I mean, these guys that are doing video at Georgia and Tennessee, they're rock stars. They're going to be working in Hollywood or for ESPN. They put out the best videos ever. I've written stories just on the hype, the practice video, the hitting drills. I've done complete stories because they're that doggone good, and it's better access than we're going to get. But if these guys really wanted to do a virtual scrimmage, they could have taken clips from practices and bunched them together and made a scrimmage out of it. They could have, that's how, and I guarantee you they talked about it. But I also guarantee you that Kirby Smart's saying, no way. There is no way that we're going to show you what Georgia's got on film right now. They're not going to show you any more of these guys' practice clips from last year or workout tapes from they're not going to do it. He's not going to show you how these guys look. Why should he? Nobody else is showing their guys. Why should Georgia pull out old footage? And then there's the politics of it. Who wins? Which clip do you use? How is it fair to the kids if you show more highlights of Kenny McIntosh and you show James Cook being stopped on third? It wouldn't be right and it wouldn't be fair. That's what I'm here for. So I've got a story already written on how the G-Day game would go. I've got a fictitious story on who makes plays, who wins the game, and I'm not sure if I'm going to run it tomorrow or Sunday. Right now, I think I'm going to hold it for Sunday because the thing I'm going to write for tomorrow before the game, listen, I'm talking like there's a real game. We already know who wins, for God's sakes. I'm going to write 3 things to watch. So for those of you who are going to watch the Notre Dame-Georgia game, I want to point some things out. And, by the way, Cole Kmet is on the line, and he would like to thank Kirby Smart for making him look like Rob Gronkowski in that game and for getting to cover him in the first half. Well, obviously they covered him, but Georgia's plan was inadequate. So that's my next point. Georgia could have picked a lot of games for their virtual reality game. They picked Notre Dame. Now, Notre Dame was the highest TV ratings game of the year up until Alabama LSU. It was the highest price ticket. There was a lot of people that were astounded that CBS used their night game provision for that game rather than Alabama LSU, but that's how big Notre Dame Georgia was. And let me tell you, the town was on fire. It was a great football environment. People said, man, I don't know if I'm ever going to see Athens like this again. I said, yeah, you will. When they make Georgia and Florida home and home, it'll be like this every time. Right, and I know this because when I covered Tennessee and it was Tennessee, Florida, it was like that every year. Tennessee was on fire, whenever Florida had come to town and vice versa. And we'll get to that after, 2023 has been extended to. Then it'll probably turn into a home and home, I would imagine, especially after this crisis and people in Athens realizing how much money they've lost and how much money they could have used for their hospitals and civic government and things as they deal with this crisis. Now that businesses are closing down, they're going to do everything they can to help their town. But I digress. Let me get back to the point I was trying to make here. So it's the Notre Dame game. Georgia didn't play real well in the Notre Dame game. I mean, that game, they were lucky. Now, so here's a confession. People will like this because people always say, oh man, you got to be rooting for somebody. Okay. I root for me. I root for Team Mike. It just so happened that week I'd gone on the Paul Feinbaum show and I made it a point to be very clear that Georgia was going to win this football game. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Notre Dame was a has-been. Brian Kelly had compared playing at Notre Dame to being on Broadway, and I said that the curtain had come down because Notre Dame hadn't won against the top 5 road team since something like 2005 or 2003 against. It was ridiculous. They've been off. They haven't beat anybody good on the road forever, and they still get ranked every year and blah blah. And I covered their championship game against Alabama. They got their whatever blown out. Right? Remember that game down there in Miami or Miami Gardens? What a blowout, right? They didn't belong on the field without. So I'm thinking, man, this Notre Dame team, come on. I'd done the Brian Kelly and Brian Kelly is a complete showman. I love the guy. He's a great football coach, and Notre Dame's lucky to have him, I think. But I thought there's no way. This Georgia team is they're gonna destroy Notre Dame. They're so much better in so many respects. Let me tell you, Notre Dame played a great football game. Notre Dame outcoached Georgia. Georgia was lucky to win that game. There is one major reason why Georgia beat Notre Dame, and I'm going to look at the comments, and I'm going to see who can tell me the number one reason why Georgia beat Notre Dame last season. Somebody tell me why. I'm looking at the comments here. Why did Georgia beat Notre Dame? Tell me what you remember from that game. Looking. Does anybody know? Does anybody know? Why did Georgia beat Notre Dame? What was the key to that game? Huh? Anybody tell me? I'm still looking. Boom. There it is. There it is. Bob and Rich were able to get that before I was able to play my smart aleck music here. Bob and Rich, great call. 6 false start penalties on Notre Dame. They had 12 penalties. Six were false starts because of that crowd noise. And I don't normally associate Georgia with deafening noise. Like the Swamp, deafening. Neyland Stadium, deafening. Auburn, deafening. Notre Dame, deafening. But let me tell you, Georgia came to life, man. Georgia's stadium, Georgia's fans came to life. And I am not a writer that likes to say, oh, the fans this and the fans that. I don't do that. That doesn't happen very often. I've covered some big time, Michigan State's Breslin Arena. Those fans make a difference, right? Kansas, Allen Fieldhouse. Couldn't even hear the guy next to me say a word. He's 3 inches. What? I don't normally hear that for football. But that night, Sanford Stadium was on fire. And it was Notre Dame, and it was a game the fans had looked forward to the whole offseason. And, man, the Bulldogs needed him. Listen, there's some Bulldog barking over there. He's getting excited. He's hearing me talk. That's right. I'm talking about the Bulldogs. Let me hear you. You some barking over there. Neighborhood dogs. People probably cussing me because I'm talking too loud in my backyard. But the fans came to life, and they won that game because of the fans. I'm convinced. Oh, see, they're getting fired up. I'm getting all the dogs in the neighborhood fired up about this. In my neighborhood, I think that 2/3 of the houses have some shape, form, or fashion of a ceramic bulldog in front of it. And this is like a Georgia thing. Like Tennessee's got orange everywhere, but they've actually got the ceramic bulldog here. If it's not on the mailbox, it's in front of the house. So that's a Georgia thing. It's cool. I like it, right? Better than the live alligators I've seen recently on Facebook that are on the darn Florida campus. I mean, that's getting carried away there. So looking back at that game, looking back at the Notre Dame game, a few things struck me. And I haven't written the story yet about what you're going to see during the replay. But as we discuss the Notre Dame game, George Pickens did not have a catch. George Pickens did not have a catch against Notre Dame. That's nuts. That's absolutely nuts. Here's Swift, 18 carries, 98 yards. He was pretty good. Had a 15-yard run, looked pretty good. Harrion, 8 carries, 43 yards. They did about. Cager came up big, 5 catches, 82 yards and a touchdown. Thought that was Lawrence Cager's coming out party. Demetrius Robertson, 4 catches, 48 yards. Did pretty good. But Cole Kmet, how about 9 catches for 108 yards for the Notre Dame tight end? Unbelievable. Big game for Tay Crowder. 9 tackles for Tay in that game. I still don't understand why Tay Crowder didn't get invited to the combine. Cody Taylor wants me to call the dogs. I did. Did you hear him barking? I was talking about Georgia beating Notre Dame, and the dogs in the neighborhood started barking. They must have been excited that night. I don't know. Did dogs really watch football? Dog fans do. Georgia fans are a little crazy. They are hunkered down right now, too, just like me. I'm quarantined, and that's why we're doing a lot of these shows. Coming to you, talking football. Hope it brings you a little bit of normal. Just remembering that Notre Dame game. I keep going back to this box score. Brian Kelly had talked so much about having his team prepared and working on that crowd noise. And I'm going to go over some of the things Brian Kelly said because I thought he was pretty transparent after that loss. It was a disappointed locker room. We certainly don't come down here to play these games and feel good after a physical game like that and come up short. Congratulations to Georgia. They're a good team, obviously. It was a good physical game on both sides of the ball. You could hear it out there. The physicality was real. It was probably one of the most physical games that I have coached against any team. That's saying a lot. And I've coached a lot of games. Georgia made a couple more plays than we did. I know these all sound cliche, but when you break it down, our guys fought to the very end, and Georgia just made a couple more plays. He says we have to coach a little bit better. I thought actually Notre Dame outcoached Georgia's staff that night. We have to make a couple more plays. That was really the difference. On whether he feels better about his team leaving UGA than when they arrived. I certainly know a lot more about our team. It's hard to measure your team early in the season. We're a physical, fast team that's persistent and that will play for 4 quarters. Thought that was interesting. The core of this football team is one that's gritty, hard-nosed, and physical. Just again, short a number of playmakers tonight. we'll get it back in the next 2 weeks. It was a great game. It really was. It came down to the end. I didn't think that Georgia played its best game. Certainly did not think they played their best game. Disappointed. That game even won. They won 23-17, but that was not the dominance that I had expected. The Georgia run game wasn't as good as I thought it would be that night. I'm taking a look here. Yeah, as I was saying, Cole Kmet 7 catches for 68 yards in the first half. I mean, good grief. Who was calling defense? Matt Rule, the guy that gave up 11 catches to Pickens in the Sugar Bowl. Jake was efficient. I mean, Jake Fromm 20 of 26, only 187 yards though. But the run game, this wasn't as dominant as I thought it would be. And we'll see that tomorrow. So when you watch that game, I mean, there'll be a lot of cool things. I can't wait. Now, what I can't wait for, what will be cool, and what I will be watching for, is Kirby Smart. And Kirby, he's going to talk about the decision on the field goal. Remember that? But Kirby, he's going to point out some things they did wrong. This game is right up Kirby's alley. I guarantee. He already knows. He already knows where he's going to point out where this team can get better. And because that's his whole offseason thing. Remember earlier when Kirby had that teleconference with beat writers, and I asked the question, who are 5 guys, that really look good, or who are guys that look good? He named 5 guys. They were all on offense. So he's not going to be giving a whole lot of love and a whole lot of sugar to his guys and getting their heads all blown up. He's going to be pointing out things they did wrong. He's going to be pointing out areas that they needed to improve, lessons that were learned. He'll point out some good plays. But I think Kirby will also provide some constructive criticism, and you will hear how he thinks as a football coach. And that's what I'm always fascinated with when I listen to Kirby's press conferences. His Tuesday press conferences during the season are always better than the Monday press conferences. The Monday press conferences, he comes in there, buttoned up, with the CEO look and the dress shoes and no socks and stuff like that. And he's talking about the weekend before, and he's ready to take fire and heat for any controversial calls that were made or weren't made. And he's going to be complimentary and just dip his toe in the water on the other team. And Monday's almost like political, right? But then he comes in there on Tuesday after practice, and he's got the workout shirt on and the visor's pulled down to here. And he's in Kirby practice mode, right? The sweat, the stubble, there's still a little sweat on him from practice. The guys are walking by in the hallway dragging because it's been a tough practice. Their uniforms are grass stained. And you get okay, now you got the football coach Tuesday. What do you guys want to know? Now you get the football coach Tuesday night because he is in game mode Tuesday nights. And so I always enjoy the Tuesday night football press conferences with Kirby Smart. I feel like my hand's crooked here. More than I do the Monday press conference. I don't like the button down guy. I like the guy that said, how about them whatever dogs, right? That's the Kirby. Because he's got the football hat on. That's the Kirby football. Not the politician, not the guy that's, and even when he is the politician, SEC Media Days, fine about, he still is transparent. He'll still give you some juice. He'll still tell you what's going on. He's not going to lie to you. He's not going to mislead you. Kirby's a confident guy that believes what he believes. Now, there may be times he doesn't say certain things. He's not going to disclose things. But as a guy to cover, and again, I feel fortunate to have covered some great coaches, really enjoy covering Kirby Smart. He's fun to Kirby the safety. Yeah, I mean, look at the plays this guy. He was an all-ACC safety. That's the other thing. You look at Kirby even now, and if you saw him at the grocery store, now he's Kirby Smart, but you wouldn't say this is some guy that would knock your block off. You wouldn't think this is some hard-hitting demon guy with this ridiculous Ant-Man strength. But let me tell you, to play SEC football, you got to be that guy. And Kirby Smart was that guy, and it wasn't that long ago. I mean, I was covering Tennessee at night. That was the 98 team I covered with Tennessee. And, I think back to those guys, and I still talk to, guys like Fred White and T. Martin, Darwin Walker, Travis Henry, Jamal Lewis. I've run across these guys. Kirby's the same age they are. And I think, man, I keep forgetting, that Kirby is still a pretty young guy at 44 years old. It really wasn't that long ago that he was on the field delivering helmet-to-helmet shots. And you see those videos sometimes, you're just like, man, he was a maniac. I mean, he would really stick you. Now, he was good at getting where he needed to be. But that guy comes out on Tuesdays. And so that's why the Tuesday press conferences are fun. So really looking forward to seeing Kirby break down the film tomorrow. The game, not so much. The Kirby Twitter account, definitely. I will definitely be tuned in watching the Kirby Twitter account. And, hey, we're 1 week away from the draft. Had a story go up earlier today. It was really weird. I had a station, I want to say it was in Burlington, Vermont. And I get, people are always looking for guys to talk football on radio. I mean, that's one of the great things about college football. It doesn't matter, all over the country. I've got regular shows I do in Birmingham on Monday, and I do Nashville on Tuesday. I do Athens on Monday as well. But Burlington, Vermont showed up, and they wanted to do an interview with me about Jake Fromm. And I was like, sure, Burlington, Vermont. And the interview starts with, can I compare Jake Fromm to Tom Brady? Well, I guess I can. Thought that was interesting. They're starting to hear that Jake Fromm could be the pick there to the New England Patriots. Jake Fromm to the Patriots? Sure. I'll talk about that. Now, I'm not going to put Jake Fromm in the same league with Tom Brady. You'd be nuts to do that. But when you think about the offense that Bill Belichick runs and how he likes to use so many different weapons, he's going to need somebody cerebral. He's going to need a processor. He's going to need somebody that can spread the ball. Now, there was an article done by Mass Live, which is a newspaper digital site up there, also comparing Jake Fromm to Tom Brady. I think that's why this radio station called. Their point was when Tom Brady came out of college, he was a 6th-round draft pick. And, he was said not to have a lot of athleticism. There were questions about Tom Brady's arm. And they were just making the point that, hey, there's these same questions about Jake Fromm. Now, that said, Ian Rappaport recently reported that there's been a lot of buzz about Jake because he's interviewed well. That doesn't surprise any of us that cover Jake. I mean, Jake, when you get talking football with Jake, he loves it. I mean, his eyes light up, and, he's just on another plane. He is the best processor. He does have the best football IQ of all these quarterbacks coming out this year. There's no doubt Jake won the interviews, no question. And his stock has been rising because of it. Even Mel Kiper kind of backpedaled a little bit earlier this week on a conference call I was listening in on. And he said, well, do you want to forgive him because he lost his top 4 receivers, his tight end, his center, and a 1,000-yard rusher? Maybe you should give him a break and look at him in the second round. Well, now that was a different Mel Kiper than the one that, a week or 2 weeks ago that was talking about, he could go to the 4th or 5th round, his throwing arm, blah, blah, blah. And, and to be fair, Mel's job is to kind of gauge what the teams are saying and his sources. And he's been doing it so long. I really enjoy watching Mel Kiper and Todd McShay. These guys work hard at it. They've got sources. They've done it a long time. They're not always right, but they're going to give you the best information they've got. And I think what happened with Jake is the information's changed. And I think there's been a rebound effect. And Jake has come out and done some interviews, some very colorful interviews, showed that side of his personality. He looks like himself again. He sounds like himself. He's confident. He's comfortable. I think Jake feels like he's in a really good place. Let's take a look at some of your comments here. John William Adams, I am with you. And Jim Nagy made the point again that the quarterback that Jake most compares with skill set wise is Drew Brees, who, by the way, was a 2nd-round draft pick. A lot of the same questions, although Drew Brees has big hands, Jake's were a little smaller. But if you're playing in a dome stadium, the whole weather thing. See, that's the only thing about New England that bothered me. And it's not all about Jake's hand size. You remember that story about Jake's hand size being less than 9 inches from finger to thumb. Mine's probably 7, and I don't know what mine is, but it's not as big as these quarterbacks. And I say about hand size, it's not a problem unless it's a problem. And against Kentucky, it looked like a problem. Well, now the Kentucky game, I'm going to give them a break because it was horrible weather. You guys saw I had Michael Barnett on Sunday night. He told us it was the coldest game he'd ever played in. By the way, we're going to have Eli Wolf this coming Sunday, so we'll have Eli on. It'll be exciting to talk to Eli Wolf, but I'm going to give him a pass for the Kentucky game. It was more the Texas A&M game that I didn't think Jake looked real sharp with the wet ball. And now, can he adjust and get better? Absolutely. But going in, would that be a concern if I was a cold weather team? It would. And I just felt like Jake played better in dome stadiums. I really did. I thought he played well in the Sugar Bowl against Baylor. I thought he played well against Alabama in both of those games in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and certainly against Auburn. So Jake has shown me that you put him in decent climate. Jake Fromm can make all the plays. Amos Williams, I know Mel's been wrong a lot. Here's the thing. I want to be fair to other people that do this. Is someone who gives opinions a lot. As I said, I do these radio shows in Birmingham, Nashville, Athens. I get asked opinions. I give them. I tell you what I think. Now, I know I'm not going to be right all the time, but that's not going to make me waver and sit on the fence, right? Because in my opinion, I've got a good perspective. I may be wrong, but I'm approaching it right. I have some logic to my answer, right? You're not always going to be right. You're going to be wrong sometimes. What you can do is make sure that you have as much information and knowledge and perspective on a situation before you comment on it. And if you have that background, then your opinion matters, right? It matters more than, just maybe some random person that has only watched football for a couple of years. In my case, I've watched it a long time. I talked to a lot of coaches, and I'll call coaches. I'll just call them up. I'll call Gene Stallings up and say, Coach, what do you think of this? Hey, I talked to Vince Dooley. I talked to Herschel Walker for an hour in New Orleans this year. He was our first ever football writers freshman legend. What he did in 1980 in the Sugar Bowl is unbelievable in that game. The story of Herschel and the shoulder and going back in the game. What a beast. What a hero. Best college player ever. Come on. Look, all due respect to Jim Brown. And Jim Brown, certainly in my mind, may be the greatest NFL player ever. But, the fact that Jim Brown didn't have, enough opportunity. We're not talking about opportunity. What did you do? Someone said, well, did you know he was a great lacrosse player? That's great. What did he do in football? The numbers aren't even close. That was political. And when sports and politics collide, I just want to pull my hair out. Because I don't like playing politics, man. I'm not good at it. Anybody that knows me will say, man, Griff, yeah. Boy, he's a guy, he'll just say the wrong thing at the wrong time. He is not good at politics. I'm just not good at politics. Just not. So I just come straight. I throw it out there. Who knows? I'm probably I'm probably offending somebody saying that Herschel's better than Jim Brown. I'm not trying to be insensitive to anyone. I'm just telling you from my observation, what they did as college football players, what Herschel did was not matched by what Jim Brown did at Syracuse. It just wasn't. And Herschel should have been number one. And I think it damaged ESPN's credibility not to have him number one. And to be fair to ESPN, they got to do lists all the time. So, again, I don't want to take because I'm wrong about stuff. All you got to do is go on my Twitter account. People never forget. At Mike Griffith 32. There it is. Jonathan Sisson. UGA has a chance to have 4 first-round picks. Or does it? It looks like there's a question mark there. Swift, Thomas, Fromm, and Wilson. Probably won't happen. That's interesting. That actually entered into my mind earlier this evening if Jake Fromm could slide into the first round. And we have heard talk about Isaiah Wilson going in the first round. Now, there's 2 different stories here. Two different trains of thought on this. Where Jake is concerned, all it takes is one team to like you. Remember when Tim Tebow went in the first round? All it took was one team. There were a lot of other teams said, man, Tebow can't play. Tebow can't play. All it took was one. Will there be that one team that'll take Jake Fromm in the first round? That's a good question. Fair question. Somebody late in the first round, perhaps. I don't know. Isaiah Wilson, look, he was raw. His feet weren't ideal. He was a little top heavy. But, man, you can't coach 6'7", 350. And he is every bit of it. He is a giant. And you give him some NFL coaching and some time where he can focus strictly on football and he doesn't have to go to class, right? Because that is a big part at Georgia. You've got to cut that time out to go to class and go to the tutoring session in the academic sport group. It's tough to balance your time as a college athlete. When you're in the NFL, it's all football all the time. And a guy like Isaiah Wilson, again, 6'7", 350. So I think, Jonathan, you may be onto something. Now, I think it's more likely that Isaiah slips in just because of the need for offensive tackles. Like, we've seen these mock drafts where Andrew Thomas is going 14 overall, and he's the 4th offensive tackle taken. There's such a need and a demand at that position, such a value. And Isaiah Wilson being an offensive tackle, that does give him a chance. So that's a good call there. Now, conversely, there's been some speculation that DeAndre Swift could slip out of the first round because there's only 2 teams that really need a running back in the first round, and that's Tampa Bay and Miami. Now, Miami has 3 first-round picks, and so seems to me if I was a betting man, I'd put my money on Aqua number 7, right? DeAndre Swift going to the Dolphins. But could he slip out of the first round? I suppose he could. The only upset in my mind is if DeAndre is not the first back taken. I think he is clearly the top back in the draft. His versatility, his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. I know he ran a 4.48. I know that his speed coach celebrated that, but I think DeAndre's faster than that. I know when I saw some of the numbers, the GPS numbers, he was one of the top 3 or 4 fastest guys in practice. Love his burst. Love that he showed he could run heavy this year. He showed the scat back and the speed in the corners. And I did a story early in the year. He didn't. There was a couple of first downs, 3rd and shorts that he didn't make, and we started to see Harrion get those tough yardage carries. And I don't want to say I called him out on it, but I did write a story pointing out that Brian Harrion was a more efficient short yardage runner. And it seemed like after that story was written, all of a sudden DeAndre Swift started bringing some pads, and he became the short yardage guy. And I don't think he was stopped in short yardage the rest of the year. Now he ended up with a shoulder very late, but Swift showed me, he proved to me, any doubt that I had that he could go short yardage or goal line, he wiped it out, man. And on a lot of those runs, he was running heavy through the holes. He didn't always look to cut. He didn't always look to bounce outside. He showed he could take those holes on and take those linebackers on and break tackles. So I think DeAndre showed you that power element. We know he's got the home run ability around the corner. We've seen him catch the ball out of the backfield since his freshman year. We've seen him in blitz pickup. He's tough. He doesn't miss on those. And then this year we saw leadership. When Georgia lost that game to South Carolina, and Jake appeared shook for a little while. At least he didn't show up for his media stuff, or he wasn't made available. All of a sudden he wasn't coming to media things. I don't know if that was his decision, team decision, coach decision, but suddenly DeAndre Swift became the voice of the team, and Swift threw down the gauntlet and said, we're in a playoff. We got to win every week. And you know what? They did. They did. And so while I know there's people disappointed that Georgia finished with 2 losses, 12-2, dude, they were 5-1 against the top 25, and they finished number 4 in the country, even though we know that team wasn't as good as the 2017 and wasn't as good as the 2018 team. It just wasn't. They had a serious deficiency on the perimeter, particularly after Lawrence Cager went out with the injury, and Pickens getting himself suspended for half a game, team rules violation another half a game. I mean, Jake throwing 70% completion with Lawrence on the field, less than 50% without Lawrence on the field. I mean, Georgia was a team with some issues. And they still won the Sugar Bowl, finished 12-2, ranked number 4, 5-1 against top 25 competition. So that tells me a lot. Even though I started the show saying I thought they got out-coached by Notre Dame, I did. Watch the first half and you tell me. You watch the first half tomorrow. And I don't know what Kirby will say. Sometimes Kirby will say that. I don't know. He won't go out of his way to make it a point. But if push comes to shove, I mean, they weren't ready for Cole Kmet. They were not ready for this guy. He looked like Rob. I kept saying, who's covering this guy? Hello, he's a pretty big guy. Is somebody missing him here? They changed their scheme up in the second half. Made a huge difference. Look at this. Philip Jordan Wells checking in. Good to see you tonight, sir. John William Adams. Will some NFL teams trade out of this year's draft in some picks thinking they will get the return investment next year, keep the salary low? I haven't dug that deep in the draft beyond watching the mocks to see where the Georgia guys are going to fall in the first round. I mean, my perspective right now at this stage of the offseason is mostly on Georgia. Now, sometimes I'll be asked to do some analysis on the league-wide stuff, and I'll dig a little bit into Alabama or Florida. Had a conversation with my buddy Edgar Thompson the other day that covers the Gators. We talked for about an hour. We're going to do one of these. Before long, I'll have Edgar on here, and him and I will talk Georgia, Florida, and break all that down. I'll see if I can get Cecil Hurd on there. Cecil and I go way back when I covered Alabama in the 90s. Obviously, I know plenty of people that cover Tennessee. But we can break it down. We're going to have a nice long off season, and we're going to keep doing these type of video productions. The Dog Nation fans are so tuned in, they just can't get enough. And I enjoy talking about it. And like I said, I'm quarantined. I'll talk to my neighbor, but and they'll ask me how's the team look or something like that. But we can't have conversations like this the conversations that get the neighbor dogs excited talking about the Bulldogs. I start talking about Bulldogs, and dogs start barking, and that's kind of what's happening tonight. Good to see Jeff Hood watching. He's kind of Mr. Zaxby's here, out here in Oconee County, where home of Zaxby's, right down the road in Watkinsville. I've always been. I don't know. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying this. That I've always liked Zaxby's. I mean, I can say that they're not a sponsor or anything like that. But I mean, I've just always liked Zaxby's. They're just, I like Chick-fil-A too. But some days it's got to be Zaxby's. There's just a little bit more zing to it, right? There's just a little, you get a little bite to it. A little more. What can I say? I like Zaxby's. Good stuff. Richard Sheffield. We just need football. It's interesting, Richard. I saw that Greg McElroy did an interview the other day. Greg's another guy that I got a lot of respect for. I got a lot of respect for him as a quarterback and what he did at Alabama. I don't think he gets his due, much like Jake Fromm. But I got respect for him as an analyst, too. I think he does a great job. He's obviously pretty tuned in to Kirby. Kirby was on that Alabama staff when McElroy was there, so I feel like McElroy's Georgia analysis is probably better than most. To me, I think I've told y'all, I think Eric Zier sets the bar. I think Stinchcombs are obviously great. They're former Dogs. David Pollock. But I feel like Greg McElroy going in on game weekends can sit down with Kirby and kind of get a really good read. So he's always good to talk to. But anyway, he was saying that if there's not a college football season, that college football sports would implode. And there are some facts here, and I don't know how much we talked about this the last time I was on, but I did a story, I want to say about a week and a half ago. Greg McGarity kind of opened the books for me. I told him, I said, look, I want to see how this works. I want to know what's going to happen to Georgia without football. I want to know where you're at. I hear so much about this reserve fund. I've heard fans that are upset because you won't spend the reserve fund and this and that, and now all of a sudden, thank goodness you have a reserve fund, so tell me how it works. And I'm trying to go off the top of my head here. I'm not going to do that. Let me call the story up because I want to break it down. The bottom line is this. Georgia's got over $100 million in the reserve fund. Georgia could sustain a fall without football, but Georgia is the exception to the rule, folks. According to Learfield IMG, only 41% of the Power 5 schools even have a reserve fund. So that's 2 out of 5. And out of that 2 out of 5 that have a reserve fund, I will guarantee you that only half of them have enough money to cover a football season. So we're talking about only 20% of the programs in the Power 5 that could handle their budget getting hit without football. For the group of 5, the smaller schools, only 26% have a reserve fund. That's 1 out of 4. And if you apply that same logic, then only half of them would have enough, which I think would be generous. That would only be 12%, 1 out of 8, 12.5%. So, and here's why, because college football, let me to illustrate this. Let's see here. So Georgia with $100 million. Georgia football, doing my Google search here. Georgia football, search terms, what if 100, I don't think I put 100 million in the headline, did I? Here we go. Georgia athletics prepared for what if with more than 100 million in reserve fund. So when we talk ticket sales, right? How much does Georgia make on ticket sales? This was based on last year. Let's find these numbers here before I tell you. I want to make sure I get it right here. I need to give myself the here we go. The annual football revenue is approximately $70 million between ticket sales and seat donations, right? You got to pay a certain amount just to buy the seats, and then you got to buy the actual seats. $70 million between those two things and other peripheral income such as concessions, right? So that's $70 million out of 150. Now, your SEC package money, this is the money that the SEC distributes out of their television rights deals and et cetera, $44.5 million. Now, you know where most of that money comes from. It comes from football. Like, for example, one thing McGarity told me I thought was interesting, that Georgia only would have gotten a cut of the SEC's money for the NCAA basketball tournament, which was estimated to be around $3 million. That's peanuts. We all think, oh, the NCAA basketball tournament, it's really not that much money, okay? That was a surprise to me. I thought that the NCAA basketball tournament generated all this revenue. Well, it does, but it gets spread out across how many schools? So the cut's not that big. The conference cut is dependent on how many sessions your team's playing. So if you have 4 teams that advance to the Elite Eight, that's a lot of basketball games, right? Each game is a session or a segment. I can't remember the buzzword, but what they had expected was about $3 million was going to be their cut. So you're like, wait a minute, you're saying $44 million for ticket sales, only $3 million for the NCAA? Yeah, so the stuff hasn't really hit the fan yet, okay? Because the spring sports seasons aren't really revenue sports. Now Georgia baseball charges ticket prices, but track doesn't, and softball doesn't, and it's not like Georgia baseball makes a ton of money. I don't have the money in front of me. I don't even know if they make money. They probably just break even. So it's not like you've really lost that money yet, because you were only expecting $3 million on the NCAA. None of your spring sports really make money. In fact, you probably come out ahead. You probably spend more money than you make during the spring. So they haven't really felt it yet. Now, when football season comes, if it doesn't happen, tsunami. So we talked about that. Georgia tickets and ticket licenses, or whatever you want to call them, $70 million. Throw in another $44 for the television package, which would be greatly affected without a TV season. I mean, Greg Sankey said today on his radio interview in Knoxville, that's a variable number. So let's say $44 million and $70 million. What do we got there? What's the math? Help me out here. 114 of the 150. So that leaves $36 million. Where does that come from? I would bet you that largely comes from the McGill Society of Georgia, which is the major donors. And what do they donate to? Football. So I would venture to say that if you were going to trace that money out of that $150 million, probably 85% of it comes from football. It's that important. And it's that important at every school. And without that money, the other sports, you saw Cincinnati, cut their men's soccer program earlier this week. Old Dominion has cut wrestling. You're going to see more of that. More schools are going to make more cuts. Everybody's in a budget cutting mode right now in anticipation of the lost revenue. There's still some discussion about games without fans. Sankey sidestepped that tonight. Wouldn't answer that. Said, I don't have to answer that. It's April 17th. There's still time, people. We don't need to answer these questions. But, of course, we all wonder. And so we talk about it like we're doing here tonight on Friday Night Mike. My show sponsored by Ingles. Friday nights, Sunday nights, Tuesday at noon. This Sunday night, Eli Wolf, transfer from Tennessee, came in here. Eli had that big catch against Florida, trying to get a guy to come on with Eli, trying to get one of Eli's teammates to come on. Would love to put the 2 guys up. Insurance policies, John Adams wants to know. Not that I'm aware of. Don't really know. Kevin Miller says it just like that. All the McGarity haters are quiet. That has been a puzzling thing for me. And now I'm going to admit that I'm late to the party. I'm not going to pretend that I know all the history of Greg McGarity at Georgia. But I can tell you, in the 2 years that I've covered this program, this guy is a complete gentleman. He is an incredible ambassador. He's universally respected in the league. But more than anything, he's the yin to Kirby's yang. Kirby wants, Kirby gets. And Greg, we were talking about this the other day, and he was talking about how he views his role. Now, maybe hasn't worked as well for him with other coaches, but with Kirby it works well. Greg sees it as his role as the athletic director, not just to handle the finances and make sure that the school is solvent in times like this, but he's trying to fulfill the visions that his coaches have. What do you need to have? And then he's going to try and help them get it. He's not necessarily the hard charger himself, right? He wants to work hand in hand. So maybe my thought is, when you've got a hard-charging, assertive guy like Kirby, you got to have somebody that can work with him. Somebody that's willing to go, okay, yeah, what's the idea? Tell me what, But if you got a couple guys, if the football coach is going, well, I don't really know. And then Greg, well, give me some, you got to have So to me, it's the relationship. And I've observed this at other schools. I saw it at Michigan State when they were having success. With Tom Izzo and Mark Hollis, they had a great thing going. Tennessee, when they had Doug Dickey and Philip Fulmer. Doug Dickey, a visionary, Diamond Doug as we called him there. Alabama, Hootie Ingram and Gene Stallings. They got a different AD in there, a man by the name of Bob Backrath. He didn't mix well with Stallings. Stallings is out the door. I mean, that relationship, that AD football coach it's just like what general manager and football coach in the NFL. So important. And Kirby and Greg, they mix, man. Greg gets Kirby what he wants. And I think fans are starting to figure that out. We're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we moved the Auburn game. Hey, folks, Kirby signed off on this. Kirby was the one that said in Destin 2 years ago, he didn't want Georgia he didn't want Georgia Tech and Auburn in the same month. He said that. Now, in a perfect world, Georgia gets 2 straight home games and it evens everything up from, when them having to play at Auburn twice in a row because of conference. You're never going to get the game back. That ship has sailed, okay? You took one for the team. People criticize McGarity for that. I don't know what the heck he was supposed to do. I would suggest he probably got some concession that we're not aware of, because that's how the SEC league office does it, right? That would have been Mike Slide back then, but that's how the league office does it. They work with their member schools and they see if they can make everybody happy. Now the ADs, they don't like to talk about this. For example, I talked with Coach Fulmer last week when the announcement came up that the Masters and Georgia Tennessee would be a doubleheader. I called him up and I said, hey man, I just talked with Greg McGarity, and McGarity's comment was, man, this is going to be a heck of a doubleheader. Coach, could you share your thoughts on this? And he said, well, right now I'd rather not. I said, okay. I mean, sometimes as a reporter, you go for a quote, and the guy doesn't want to talk. And I've covered Coach Fulmer forever, and he's given me, 99 times out of 100, Philip Fulmer's going to give me an interview. But for whatever reason, he didn't want to talk about, and I said, well, what about this? I mean, surely when the Georgia Auburn game got switched for Georgia Tennessee, surely you had something to do with that, because I know darn well that Tennessee didn't like playing Florida and Georgia back-to-back. I mean, you talk about a nightmare. There were a lot of seasons lost with that combination. If you got by Florida, then Georgia tripped you up. Or you lost to Florida and you beat Georgia, and everybody said, so what? You already lost Florida. So that was a win for Fulmer. That was what made that happen, was Fulmer becoming AD and going, heck yeah, let's do that. Because he doesn't want to play Georgia and Florida back-to-back, and so he can move that Georgia game back. I think it's better for the league. I'd always contended that Tennessee, Florida, the second week of the season was just crazy. But Florida did it that way because they played Florida State the last week of the season. And I just said, this is nuts. I mean, if you're Tennessee or Florida, your season's over the second week if you lose that game. Why are you playing a game that big that early? But this worked out. Works out better because now you're going to have Georgia, Tennessee. It's going to be a very important Eastern game. You could really afford to lose to Auburn more than you can afford to lose to Tennessee. Not saying Georgia plans on losing either game next year. I don't think they will. But a conference, a divisional game is more important than a non-divisional game because of the tiebreakers and the importance of getting to Atlanta for the SEC championship. But anyway, he just didn't want to go there. Even though I know that Philip had to have signed off on that, and it worked. And Auburn wanted out too. Because they didn't want to have to play Georgia and Alabama. Everybody's going, well, they got to play LSU. Well, LSU's not going to sustain success. Okay? They're not. LSU is not going to sustain success. I've said it once, and I'll say it again. Ed Orgeron will not be the head coach at LSU in 5 years. He won't. He just won't. And there's a number of reasons for that. Primarily wear and tear. Part of me is like, well, how many coaches will be at their school in 5 years? I bet you right now, if we're talking about 130 FBS schools, what percentage of those 130 coaches, what number would we say would be at their school in 5 years? Maybe 20%? 1 out of 5 tops? I don't know. I haven't done the study on this. I'd be curious. How many coaches are there right now in the SEC that have been at their school for 5 years? Well, Kirby hasn't. Okay, he's only been there 4. Let's see, the Kentucky coach has. Somebody made him the coach of the year 2 years ago. What? Hello, they did not win the Eastern Division. I don't like this. These coach of the year. The Louisville coach got coach of the year, and he lost some game by 40 points last year, like to Kentucky. How the hell does that happen? Excuse me. How the heck does that happen? Dabo Swinney wasn't even the ACC coach of the year. The guy put together 2 back-to-back undefeated seasons, and the ACC gives their coach of the year to the Louisville. Oh, well, he did the most. Oh, no. They're all playing football. All right, let me reel it back in here. So Saban, I guess Gus, right? Ole Miss, Mississippi State, no. Arkansas, no. Orgeron been there 5 years yet? I don't think so. So is that 2? And then in the East, you got the Kentucky coach, 3. Is that it? Muschamp? 3? 3 or 4? So if it's 3 out of 14, what percentage is that? That would be less than 20%, right? No, that'd be just over 20%. Yeah, because 3 out of 15 would be 20%. Okay, so let's say 25%. So my Orgeron prediction is based on the fact that only 25% of the coaches make it to 5 years anyway. And for him to go another 5 years, and I talked about this earlier. We had, like I was telling you, we had that work conference call with BA and Jeff and Michael and Connor and BJ and I made the point that once a program wins a national championship, everything changes. Everything changes. I've seen it happen before. I've seen it happen more than once. That becomes the expectation. And when you don't win a championship after that, everybody's like, oh, that was a disappointment. Like we were talking earlier about Georgia. There were Georgia fans disappointed with 12-2 and number 4 in the country in a Sugar Bowl win. Oh, I'm not even going to watch that game. You know, what? Come on. Enjoy this, folks. Don't cheat yourselves. All right? I get it. Everybody wants to be number 1. But don't set yourself up for failure by telling yourself, well, if they don't win it all, it wasn't a good season. Well, that's ridiculous. If you're in the hunt, if you're in a New Year's Six Bowl, if you're in the league championship game, right, you put yourself in position to win. That's all you can ask a program to do. And then you got to have some luck. And I'm watching LSU and Georgia, and LSU's got everybody out there. Swift can't run the ball. Cager's not dressed. Pickens is suspended for the first half. Kearis Jackson gets hurt on the first quarter. Dominic Blaylock's out the first quarter. So you got one team that's out 4 receivers and their star running back, and you got another team that's got everybody healthy. I mean, and then you drop the touchdown pass in the first play. You gotta have a little luck, man. So much of this game is the right guy's team. Alabama, right? Tua gets injured this year. Not the same team. Same thing last year when they played Clemson. Now, fans get upset when I say this, but that wasn't the same Tua after Georgia got to him. That was not the same guy. And when guys when athletes are get a little bit off, they're a lot off because there's a very fine. That's why Tua even now, the injury prone nature. I'm going to be fascinated to see where he goes in the draft. Listen, I've covered Tua enough. Love this guy. When you talk with Tua, you feel the royalty, the regalness to him. I use that word regal for Georgia fans too. But with Tua, you just feel the sincerity. I mean, you feel like you're talking to some prince because he looks you in the eye, and when he speaks to you, you almost feel his presence. I mean, he really is a fascinating football player. And when he's healthy, he's unbelievable. You saw the way he would run around. Alabama set records last year, not last year, but in 2018. That offense, they beat everybody by 23. He was unbelievable until Georgia got to him, until Kirby had a plan, right? But Tua was, but now that he's got the hip, I mean, you want to pick the guy, but is he going to get hurt again? Because his style is to run around and make plays, and how durable can you be? How long can you really do that in the league? I mean, Cam Newton's probably the greatest example, and Cam was bigger, stronger, faster, more durable, and didn't extend plays quite like Tua. And even Cam now, we're wondering about Cam. I mean, so I don't think you can invest that high in Tua if you just, second game of the year, what happens? Is he going to get hurt? Because the guys in the NFL are bigger, faster, stronger, and they know how to land on you. It's a business to them. It is a brute game. I remember talking with Sean Alexander about this. You can talk to several players about it. It's a different game. It's a more physical game in the league. It's harder to stay healthy. Let's see if you guys got any questions for me. I'm just kind of chatterboxing away here. Mike Gay brings up a good point. I do believe that has something to do with Clemson being strong at the end of the year. When you blow that many teams out, you can play a lot of guys. You don't have to play the same number of snaps. Your players don't have the same wear and tear. Look, the ACC isn't horrible football, okay? But the SEC is just better than everybody. The Big Ten is kind of a half a rung below, and then there's everybody else. And what do I base this on? I base this on NFL draft numbers. Every year, take a look at how many number of players are drafted from all the different conferences. That will give you a very good gauge of a talent's depth. And I'm trying to think the stat on the ACC. Oh, I used to pull this one out a lot when the Clemson fans would jump on me. I want to say that the ACC had maybe 8 teams that had 2 or fewer players drafted last year. Check me on that. And the SEC had 1 or something like that. I mean, it just went to show the bottom line was their bottom teams don't have a lot of NFL talent versus the SEC. And it does come down to players often. I still want to give Dabo credit. I still think it's still hard to win that many games in a row. But do I believe that Clemson would have gone back-to-back seasons undefeated in the SEC? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. LSU did it this year. But that was the first time that it happened in the league since Cam Newton at Auburn in what? Was that 2010? I think it might have been 2010 the last time a SEC team went wire to wire, undefeated, completely unbeaten through a season. So it just doesn't happen much. I don't think Clemson would have done it back-to-back. That said, I got myself in trouble. Someone might have been the LSU website. See, remember when I said earlier I'm not good at being political? There's times to retweet, and there's times not to. And when LSU tweets out, so-and-so says that Dabo Sweeney says he would take Trevor Lawrence over Joe Burrow and Tua Tagovailoa. And I tweeted I would too, but I tweeted it to an LSU account. So I should have known that the LSU fans probably weren't going to like that and they were going to take offense to that. But I would take Trevor Lawrence over Joe Burrow. Absolutely. Because guess what, Joe Burrow? You're not going to have 3 guys running open every single play in the NFL. Ain't going to happen. And all that running around you're doing, that ain't going to happen either, especially if you go to the Cincinnati Bengals. Trevor Lawrence doesn't have to rely on that as much. Trevor Lawrence has a stronger arm, and I believe that Trevor Lawrence has more of a presence than Joe Burrow. You know what Joe Burrow had this year? He was a graduate. He was a second-year graduate student. How many classes did he go to? Was it really fair to compare Joe Burrow to? I mean, Jake Fromm's going to class. He's going to the tutorial center. He's a college student, and Joe Burrow, he's just in the playbook, man. He's just hanging out for 2. If you ever wondered what it would look like if you put an NFL quarterback in a college offense, that's what you had with Joe Burrow, a 2-year graduate student. I mean, come on. He didn't even go to class. So think about the time that he had on his hands. It reminds me of poor Joshua Dobbs at Tennessee, an aeronautics major, and the poor guy stays up late studying on a Wednesday night, and he starts out slow against South Carolina, and it turns out he'd been cramming all week for a final, and you're going, Tennessee's season just blew up because Josh Dobbs is staying up late studying. Well, that was part of the reason. They had a lot of injuries. They had a ton of injuries as well. But that was part of the equation. It's like, are you kidding me? Josh, you really stayed up till 2 a.m. studying on a game week? Where are your priorities, man? Right? There we go. John M. says 2 is better to sit a year. Probably won't make a difference either way. Robert Shoup says no excuse losing to the Chickens. Are you talking about Tennessee or are you talking about Georgia this year? Because those were 2 different. I'll tell you the one thing. No, I can't even say that. I can't even say that it was both on the road. Georgia's loss at home, by the way, that was the first time, not that this stat's going to make anybody feel good, but that was the first time in Sanford Stadium history that a top 5 ranked Georgia team had lost to a non-conference team at home. Not what you want to hear, but it was a perfect storm. It was a cascade of events, right? It's like a plane crash. You always hear, so not just one thing. It takes a lot of different things, and a lot of things happened in that game. Javon Kinlaw happened, okay? That was one thing. So the Georgia offensive line, the Great Wall, wasn't exactly on top of it. They still had like 400 and some yards in South Carolina. They had almost like 150 more total yards in South Carolina. But the picks, right? The receiver running the wrong route. Jake not throwing with quite enough steam to get the ball out of bounds, turns out into a pick six. Another ball perfectly thrown, hits the receiver on the hands, goes up in the air, picked off. Rodrigo misses 2 field goals. I mean, that just doesn't happen, right? There were a lot of things that had to go wrong. And then you also saw a big play from South Carolina. Edwards had, the 46-yard catch, Brian Edwards. I think that was the only explosive play over 40 yards that Georgia gave up the entire – let's see, that was in Game 6. The next 6 games, I don't think Georgia gave up a play longer than 40 yards, again, until the SEC championship game. That's how good that defense was. So it took a lot to go wrong. People look at the game and go, they were just better. No, sometimes you just play better. And that's one of the cool things about football. It's not always the best team. It's the team that plays best. It's the team that executes best. It's also the team that stays healthy. So remember that. Final component to that, Lawrence Cager did not play in the second half of the South Carolina game. Lawrence had 3 first down catches on third down in the first half. Does Georgia win that game with Lawrence Cager healthy? I think that they do. That's how important Lawrence Cager was. They did not lose a game that Lawrence Cager was on the field on the final offensive series. Right? They lost South Carolina. He was put out at halftime. They lost to LSU. He didn't play. With Cager, you saw what they did to Florida. He was 12 of 8. Jake was 12 of 18 on third down conversions. Cager had 132. You got to have your dude, right? I mean, he was the guy. Yeah. John, does Tennessee have the best offensive line this year? Absolutely not. No. Now Tennessee's coming along, and they've got some young talent, but they're not. No, they're not there yet. Alabama probably has the best offensive line this year. And to give Jeremy, to understand the Tennessee thing a little bit. Understand that Jeremy is flipping what once was a spread team, so it had faster, lighter linemen because they wanted to run more plays, 90 plays a game. Now to more of a power pro set, which at Georgia everyone's familiar with. They want to play pro-style football. So the personnel, I think Jim Chaney is kind of massaging these changes. They are getting bigger linemen now. You see how Tennessee's recruiting. But they don't really have the personnel to be a threat yet. They don't have the quarterback yet. And no offense to Jarrett Garantano. Good quarterback, but not a great quarterback. And for Tennessee to win the East, they need great quarterback play because they lost 2 very valuable receivers. Okay, they lost 2 of those Butch Jones receivers, Juwan Jennings and Marquez Callaway. Those are big time receivers, man. Those were big targets. You saw what they did against Georgia. You saw what they did against everybody. So they lost 2 really good wide receivers there. That's going to hurt Tennessee and their defense. It's going to take them time. All right, Tennessee's on the comeback trail. They're not there yet. They did beat Kentucky last year. It'll be interesting to see if Tennessee stays ahead of Kentucky because that's big. Kentucky kind of reared their head for a little while. Remember they had their coach of the year because he won 10 games. Whatever. Kentucky, I hope you enjoyed it because you're not getting back there. So you're going to have Georgia, Florida, Tennessee. Georgia, Tennessee, Florida. Georgia, Florida, Tennessee. Georgia on top, okay? Probably 2 or 3 more years at least, minimum, because they're just stacked with talent. And as long as Kirby's the head coach, there's just no reason to believe that's going to change. Florida's coming. They're doing better things. Kyle Trask is a good quarterback, but they lost too much. They just lost too much. They lost their running back. Their offensive line has questions. How are they going to stop Georgia? Now, the Florida people are saying, well, how's Georgia going to move the ball on us? I say, check in later. Jamie Newman's kind of the real deal, and there's some pretty good running backs. But Georgia, Florida, and then, the rest. Missouri came out of nowhere for a little while there, right? Okay, I don't see that happening again. Don't see a quarterback there. I will say they built a good line, but not good enough. Who else are we talking about in the East here? South Carolina, right? Then they just lose their quarterback. Well, they beat Georgia without that guy, so I shouldn't say that. But they lost Javon Kinlaw. I think they lost their wide receiver Edwards. If he wasn't their all-time receiver, he was pretty close. I might have lost Rico Dowdell. I'm not sure on their running back situation. And after what happened last year, Georgia's probably going to beat South Carolina the next 4 or 5 years in a row because now it's fresh in your mind. It's fresh in your mind. Hey, these guys can beat us, right? There will be, because Georgia players, even though they get up for all the games, these kids got memories like elephants. They don't forget who beat them. They know what happened last year, and you better believe there'll be a payback in Columbia this year. I would lay 21 points in South Carolina right now. Without knowing who's the starting quarterback at Georgia, without knowing who's healthy, without knowing when football season is going to start, I would lay 21 points on Georgia to beat South Carolina right now, because those guys are not going to forget that game that happened last year. That's all they heard about forever. Philip Jordan says kittens with mittens. Tennessee has 4 guys, 5-star offensive linemen. They do. They got talent, but you got to give these guys some time. 1 year in the system isn't enough. As I just pointed out, who are your perimeter threats at receiver right now? I mean, Tennessee doesn't even know who their quarterback is. Every week it seems like Jeremy Pruitt's grabbing somebody else and pulling them off the field. There's just in the run. There's just not enough continuity there. So I'm not trying to insult Tennessee. Tennessee did beat a top 25 Auburn team a couple years ago. But if you look at the wins at the end of the year, I was not impressed by the bowl win over Indiana. It was Indiana. Very fortunate to win that game. Give Tennessee credit for fighting, but those two teams matched up personnel-wise, okay? And if you're on a level with Indiana football, you're not going to win the SEC East anytime soon. Tennessee's got to get by Florida. I predicted that would happen last year. I was wrong. Just can't see Tennessee making that jump next season. 2 seasons, can they get by Florida? Maybe. But at least 2 more years, and the fans should be patient, because it does take time to rebuild. What else we got here? Tennessee talk about beating South Carolina. That's great. I can say is put the film on. It is what it is, right? Covered that program a long time. They got great facilities, but they're not in Georgia's league right now. They're just not. Tennessee's probably looking at another. I don't know. They got a tough schedule next season, so you're probably looking. And I just don't know what they're going to do without those receivers. Juwan Jennings was just animal. Thinking you're maybe, you lose your middle linebacker, Batuli. You lose one of your outside pass rushers. I'm not sure what you got back in the secondary. 6, 7, 8 win team again. Not bad, right? It takes time. What if you don't have patience? Asking for a Vol fan. Oh, it's Jody. That's a funny question. Well, then you end up in this perpetual cycle of mediocrity, because you've got to give a coach time enough to build a roster, around to recruit the talent to win. And from where Tennessee was coming from, I mean, it was devastating. 2017 and 2016 was a top 10 team. So the good news is you're only 3 years removed, and you had some of those players left. That helped Tennessee kind of take that step back this year, chiefly Juwan Jennings and Marquez Callaway. But I think with Philip Fulmer as the athletic director, you're going to see more patience there. Man, you guys got me talking a lot about Tennessee. Georgia fans are going, what is up with that, Mike? Well, Kevin Miller, excited to see what kind of a difference Todd Monken can make. Okay, so here's what you need to know about that. Kirby Smart teams are always going to be able to run the football. Kirby Smart teams are always going to have an element of balance, and Kirby Smart teams will always put efficiency at the top of the list, because especially this year when you got a championship defense. So you will see some different things from Monken. You will see some motions and shifts and formations and a different way to do the same thing, which is have balance and run the ball effectively when you need to. Now also keep in mind that you didn't go through spring drills, so an offense that was going to be simple with a new quarterback, with a new coordinator, is going to be even more simple. The good news is, in an RPO system, so much of it is fluid and read on the field anyway. I don't think you need quite as much choreography and timing as you do in a pro-style offense. I think a pro-style offense, there's more intricacies to it. Your quarterbacks and receivers, have to be on the same page. When they go to the line, they've got to recognize the coverage. Is the corner covering them outside in or inside out? Is it zone? Is it man? Because they are running option routes, and the receivers' routes will depend on the type of coverage that they're getting. What you saw last year with all the Georgia injuries was the inconsistencies on the perimeter, and so Jake wasn't always on the same page as his outside receivers. That's why he missed Cager so much. Why did he complete passes to Cager? 2 reasons. 1, Lawrence could catch a football. 2, Jake knew where he would be, and he could throw the ball with more authority, knowing where Cager would be on the play. Some of these young guys, some of these guys that hadn't played or that were in the lineup because there were injuries, they weren't always going the right way. So Jake wasn't certain. His footwork didn't look the same. The throws didn't have the same. People, Jake Fromm, what's wrong? What's wrong is he doesn't trust his receivers. So he ain't going to look. It's like if you've been a pitcher, have you ever played catch with somebody? You play catch with somebody, if it's your guy, if it's your dude, if it's your buddy, man, you rear back and you just, man, bring it. Fire, because he's got it. If you're playing with somebody you don't really know the first time, you kind of just lom it. What this guy can handle. Can this guy handle, the heat here? You're not quite as sure. And that's where that whole trust with the quarterback and the receiver comes in. If you don't trust your receiver, you don't throw with the same authority. And when you start thinking, right, instead of just reacting, you're not the same guy. And that's what happened to Jake Fromm. He didn't regress. His complementary pieces regressed. His receivers weren't as good. They weren't as consistent. They couldn't be counted on to do the right things. They weren't getting open. They weren't beating press coverage. And before everybody, you're making excuses. Look, man, quarterback is a dependent position. You are relying on those guys to get open. You know what it's like? It's like being a point guard and passing, and everybody just keeps missing shots. You're not going to average 8 assists a game if you're shooting 28% from three as a team. But if everybody's burying it, well, maybe you have a point guard. And that's what Jake Fromm is. He's a point guard. He's only as good as the pieces around him. And Jake will tell you that. Jake will be the first guy to tell you that. You talk to Jake Fromm and you ask him, Jake, what was it like as a freshman? Leading your team to the national championship game, winning the SEC title game, beating Oklahoma and Baker Mayfield in a shootout. Jake said, hey, I was just glad I could hand off to Sony and Nick. Jake's not trying to fool anybody. Jake is 5 times the quarterback now that he was as a freshman. He knows that much more. But the complementary pieces weren't there. It wasn't Chubb and Michelle in the backfield. It was DeAndre Swift and the rest of the crew. There was no Javon Wims and Riley Ridley and McCole Hardman on the perimeter. Or Isaac Nott at tight end. No offense to Eli Wolf. But it wasn't the same skill set around him. And so consequently, his numbers weren't as good. He still had a good 2018 season even without Chubb and Michelle. In fact, I thought the 2018 team should have won the SEC champion. I know they should have won it. DeAndre Walker doesn't get hurt. They do win it. We always end up talking about this. I don't want to do that to you. I don't want to bring all that up. We're not going to talk about what could be. We're just not going to do it. We all saw it. We know. We all saw 2017. Georgia was the best team in the country in 2017. Didn't win the game against Alabama. Last year, had Alabama down 2 scores, should have beat them. Lose that outside linebacker, freshman checks in, can't contain. Jalen Hurts turns into a magician, right? This year, Georgia was not close. They were not close. I don't believe they were close. I did qualify their loss to LSU by pointing out that Swift couldn't run the ball, Cager didn't play, and picking you're missing your top 2 receivers the first half, and you get 2 more hurt in the first quarter. You're not going to win that game, okay? But I don't think even Georgia full steam was going to beat LSU last year. LSU last year was running on all cylinders, man. Those 3 receivers, the running back, the offensive line improved as the year went on. Joe Burrow was phenomenal. That was a phenomenal season. Put it in a time capsule. I just don't think you're going to see it from him in the NFL. I just don't. I could be wrong. Maybe he's the next Joe Montana. Maybe he'll go to the Cincinnati Bengals and turn it around and be the next Boomer Esiason. We'll see him back in the Super Bowl. But I would bet not. What do we got? Any other questions for tonight? Friday night, Mike? Robert, I'm not going to put it on the officials. You could, but I just feel like Alabama made one more play, man. That one play. How many players go in the first round next year? Oh, Donta Green. Ooh, that is a good question. First round guys for Georgia. Now remember, 3rd-year guys are eligible, so that means Jordan Davis. Wait a minute. Yes, Jordan Davis will be a junior. I think Jordan Davis is a first-round pick, the nose tackle. Malik Herring is the highest-rated defensive lineman coming back in the SEC. I don't know if Malik is a first-rounder. I think he could be, depending on the kind of season that he has. But I'm going to go Jordan Davis, yes. I think Monty Rice is going to have a good season, but I think the NFL scouts aren't going to like that he's not tall enough or whatever. But I think he's an NFL player, but he's probably not a first-rounder. But I like Monty Rice a lot. Richard LeCount, I think, could be a first-round pick. Richard was playing really good ball. I think my stat on Richard was in the last 4 games of last season. Was it the last 4? It was going back to A&M, right? So how did it go? Was it A&M, Tech, LSU, Baylor. In the last 4 games, I think Richard LeCount was a part of 4 turnovers. I think didn't he have 2 picks against Baylor in the Sugar Bowl? So Richard LeCount, the safety, I'm going to make him a first rounder. I'm going to make, how about this one? I'm going to make, and I'm not sure which one, Tyson Campbell or Eric Stokes. Not sure which one. One of those guys will be a first rounder. So that would give you 3. Is there anybody on offense? No, I don't think so. I would say 2 or 3 next year. That's what I'm going to say. Ben Cleveland, I don't know what's going to happen with Ben Cleveland. Does anybody know what's going to happen with Ben Cleveland? We didn't know that he wasn't going to play in the Sugar Bowl. We didn't know that. Where is he now? I don't know. I don't know. If Ben Cleveland, will he return to form? That would be huge. I think Ben Cleveland could be an NFL player, but I know he's had some foot stuff going on. He broke his fibula there at Missouri a couple. I don't think that slowed him last year, but I think the foot slowed him down. Ben Cleveland's kind of a mystery man to me. Georgia really needs him back and needs him to be healthy. Because if you get, everybody's talking about, Georgia lost all these starters. Look, if you get Ben Cleveland back, Ben Cleveland, Jamari Salyer, Trey Hill, let me tell you, those are some tough guys. Justin Schaefer. Remember in this Notre Dame game you're going to see tomorrow at the virtual G-Day, Solomon Kinley goes out in that game. It was a big injury, a physical game. I think he goes out. I'm trying to remember if Isaiah Wilson went out in that game. But between Justin Schaefer, Ben Cleveland, Jamari Salyer, and Trey Hill, that's a pretty good start to the offensive line. You got other guys, Warren Erickson, look good. Xavier Truss, you got Broderick Jones coming in, Tate Ratledge. A lot of talent there for Georgia, man. What else we got here? I knew I shouldn't have brought up 2nd and 26. I'm sorry, guys. That is a painful memory. I was there, man. I was there covering that game, and my heart sank. Not because I necessarily wanted Georgia to win. I was really completely indifferent. I didn't care who won the game. But just the fact that it was a breakdown, that it was a broken play, that somebody didn't do their job. And when you lose a game on a broken assignment, if somebody just beats you, that's one thing. But when you beat yourself, that's brutal. Absolutely brutal. Tough loss. But I've seen Georgia win a lot of big games in the 2 years I've covered them. Truthfully, it's been a fun beat. As I've said, Kirby, I don't know if you guys remembered what I said. This is some advice that I've taken to heart, and I'll pass it on because I think that good advice travels well, and I think it's worth repeating, and especially now, and especially in just, look, we've all made mistakes, right? Right now, if I said, is there a mistake you regret? Every one of you got something that just charges to the front of your mind. It doesn't have to be sports. Just there's something you regret. At least one thing. I could probably give you 100. Some nights I lay in bed at night and go, and then when I make a mistake in a story, everybody lets me know. So thank you very much. I have a lot of good editors out there. Sometimes they like to do it publicly. I wish they would just send me a note and say, hey, do you know you misspelled a word in the second paragraph? But Kirby's advice was this. It was at the SEC spring meetings, and he gets in front of a room, and there's 45 people in there. And it's open season on Kirby, and sure enough, he gets a question from one of the Alabama reporters there. Hey, Kirby, do you still think about that 2nd and 26 play? How much does that bother you? Blah, blah, blah. And 2nd and 26. And I'm sitting there going, oh, this is my introduction to Kirby. I'm sitting there going, oh, this is going to be good. Because, is Kirby going to fire back at this guy? What's Kirby going to do? Because if I'm Kirby, as soon as I hear those numbers, my blood pressure probably goes up. That isn't what happened at all. Kirby said, listen, guys, I had to be out recruiting 2 days later. I wasn't going to get beat twice by that play. So you got to put that out of your mind and move on. And the wisdom of that, right? The mistakes that we make, you learn from it. But if you continue to let it drag you down, if you don't forgive yourself, if you don't focus on what's ahead, then you're letting that mistake become another mistake. You're letting that mistake influence you and really kind of affect how you're able to deal with things in the future. So I thought that was some of the best advice that I'd ever heard. I always give Steve Spurrier credit for great career advice. Don't do things like everybody else, do things different. But Kirby saying don't get beat twice by that play, I take that to heart because I made plenty of mistakes. I don't want to get beat twice by the mistakes I've made. So that's kind of my shout out of advice. Look at this. I've gone past 11 o'clock. I'm sorry, folks. Kept who's out of Tucker High School? Man, Cody Taylor, I didn't know that. How about that? Tucker High School. I know all about Tucker. Oh, Donta Green. That's poor Dominic Sanders. Let him sleep. The guy was a heck of a player at Georgia. You know, there were a lot of other plays. It's just that's just tough. It's just tough. Listen, thanks for staying up with me tonight. I didn't plan on going this long. I'm sure I'll hear about it tomorrow. How long did I go? I don't want to know. I don't want to know how long I went. I'm going to answer your questions in the queue. I'll come back tomorrow morning, if not tonight, and go in there and answer some questions. If you got questions for me, I'm going to be on Twitter at MikeGriffith32. If you want to give me a follow, shoot me a message. That'd be great. Tomorrow I'll be doing a story on Kirby Smart's observations of the virtual game, which is just a code for a replay of the Notre Dame game. And then I'm going to write my story this week. I'm going to put it out. I kind of hedge. I've got my projected G-Day game. I've got a whole script written. The whole game story's done. I've got a winner, a loser, all the quarterbacks. Talk about how Jamie Newman played and Carson Beck and Dwan Mathis and Stetson Bennett and who fumbles and who gets knocked out of the game and how the game's won. It's a great game. My G-Day game script is so much better than the real game would have been. I promise you. It's much more entertaining and much more exciting. And that story will run Sunday. Get a chance, check out what Greg Sankey said tonight. He was on WNML in Knoxville. I did a transcript of it and wrote a story. That was the big news. So just to bring it all the way back to the front, the big news, Greg Sankey's not ruling out having a football season without some conferences. So we know that it's up to the respective governors when they're going to open the states up again. If some states decide to sit out, i.e. California, doesn't want to open up till January, could there be a season without the Pac-12? Could there be a season without the California teams? Sankey made it clear he's not ruling that out. And those exact words aren't in there, but there's enough other words in there that will indicate that was his sentiment. So appreciate Ingles on the beat. Enjoy doing this. Appreciate my sponsor. Hope all of you have a great weekend. I'll be back Sunday night with more thoughts, more comments. And Eli Wolf, a former Tennessee guy that transferred to Georgia seamlessly. If you would have told me that a Tennessee guy could walk into Georgia and it would be a seamless transition, I'd tell you there's no way that can happen. But that's exactly what Eli Wolf did, and we're going to give Eli a chance to tell us how he did that and was able to make that transformation to Georgia so seamlessly, and now he's got two fan bases who love him forever. So everybody, have a great night. Thanks for joining me.